So guys, the first step in making a good dress is to know how to take proper measurements. Without the measurements, you will not be able to know how to make your dress. So here I'm going to be teaching you how to take the basic skirt measurement that I've adapted for my pattern. Okay, so here I'm going to be using one of my students. First of all, you have to establish where your client places her skirt. Is it above her navel, her belly button for the Americans, or is it below her belly button? You have to establish that. And is it a high waist skirt or a normal skirt? You have to know that first. For now, we are going to be making a normal skirt, and this is a high waist skirt she's wearing. So let's say on her belly button, we're going to start from there. Now you want to make sure that you've written out all the measurements that you need, which I've earlier stated for you guys before. So you're going to say that this is because you won't have to be removing your hands when you start taking your length measurements, or else you will misplace things. So when you place your tape, beginning at where you want your skirt to be, you move down to your hip line. Now, for your client's hip, it's going to be at the peak of her bum. You have to establish that. You have to know that. And for her, it is 7 inches. Now, using my other hand, I'm going to write down waist to hip 7 inches on my paper. Please write out all the measurements you need before you start measuring, so that you won't be removing your hand once you start, like I said earlier. Then the next step is to mark out her above the knee. Now, another way for you to get your above the knee is to measure your client down to her kneecap and then minus 5 inches from whatever you have from your waist to kneecap to give you your above the knee point. But I have another method of how I make that. That is by asking your clients to stretch her hand, and then the longest finger, that's her middle finger, rest wherever that point is, that will become your above the knee point. So you write that out too on your waist to above the knee. For her, it's giving me 18 inches. Yours might be 16, 17, 18, depending on how tall, how wide you are. Then the next step for the length is going to be taking your waist to full length. That is wherever you want your skirt to be. Is it mini? Is it normal? Is it milk calf? Is it long? Wherever you want your skirt to be, that is where you stop for your full length. Now the next one is your width measurement. Now your width for the skirt is just one, and that has to do with your dart or your bust span. Of course, you don't have to take that already. That's from nipple to nipple. Okay, for her here is 7 inches. So I'm going to write that as my bust span, 7 inches. Now for the circumference, you have your round waist. Exactly, you have to mark out where you started measuring your waist from. Your round waist, hers is 28 inches, so you write that down. The next one is her round hip. You want to ensure that your tape goes round exactly on your hip line, at the peak of your hip. Alright, your bum. So hers is 34 inches. Alright, so that is how you take your basic measurements for your skirt. That is all the measurements you need. Your waist to hip, waist to above knee, your dart or your bust span, your round waist, your round hip, and that will be all for skirt measurements. With that, you can be able to sew any skirt you want to at all. Taking your measurements is very important, as this will help you to make your dress to come out very well. So for our measurements, is divided into 3 major groups. All measurements, whether you're sewing a skirt, blouse, dress, whatsoever, all measurements are divided into 3. I have taken my time to break this down for you guys so that you understand as beginners. The number 1 measurement there is length, and this measurement I'm giving here is for skirts, because we are going to be making skirts first. Length, we have waist to hip, waist to knee curve or above knee, then waist to full length. The second part of the measurement is your width. We have the dart or bust span, and then the last one is the circumference, your round waist or your round hip. Now there's a general rule that applies to these 3 sets of measurements when you are doing your pattern drafting. The number 1 set of measurements, which is your length, is not to be divided whenever you are drafting your pattern. You're cutting your clothes. Do not divide your measurements, your length measurements rather. If your waist to hip is 8 inches, leave it like that. Use that when you are drafting. The same goes to your waist to knee curve or above knee and waist to full length. Your lengths are not to be divided. Let's move over to our width. The only width we have for our skirt is just your dart or your bust span. And for the general rule, you divide it, whatever you have, into 2. That means width is divided into 2 by 2. Whatever you have as your bust span is divided by 2. Then your circumferences, you have your round waist and your round hip. Now when doing your pattern drafting, you divide your circumferences by 4. Whatsoever you have as your round waist, round hip, you always divide it by 4. So your round waist, round hip divided by 4. Now let's take a practical example. For a client, let me use myself rather. My waist to hip is 7 inches. My waist to above the knee is 18 inches. My waist to full length for a normal pencil short skirt is 24 inches. Alright, so I am not by any chance to divide these measurements. Let me give it on a straight line. 7, 18, 24. Then what about my bust span? My bust span is 7 inches. Now if I were to do my pattern drafting, I have to divide it by 2 according to the general rule. That means I'll be using 3.5 inches when doing my pattern drafting. What about my circumferences? My round waist is 28 inches. That means if I'm doing my pattern drafting, I have to divide it into 4, and that will give me 7 inches. My round hip is 36 inches. That means if I'm doing my pattern drafting, I have to divide it into 4, and that will give me 9 inches. So this is what I'll be using when I'm doing my pattern drafting. So please, you want to make sure that before you start taking measurements or making any clothes, you write out your measurements like this, and then write them out, the figures, and divide them appropriately.